and say to everybody, welcome back to Word on the Street Live. Elon and I are back together again. We have finished all our various travels. I was off in Jerusalem last week, and we had a great conversation with Jill Jacobs and Deborah Waxman from the floor of the Convention Center in Jerusalem at the World Zionist Congress, which was fascinating. And so I hope people got a chance to see that conversation. And came back from there to land right in the middle of the 2025 elections. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about what this election night means, what our perspectives are, having our experiences in national and local politics. What does this mean for the Democratic Party? What does it mean for 2026? What does it say about people's readiness to take Trump on after a year? We're going to talk a little bit then specifically about the New York City mayoral race. And we're going to be joined at that point by Phylisa Wisdom, who is the director of New York Jewish Agenda, which is kind of a sister organization to J Street. And she is on the ground in New York and has lived through this last year of the New York City mayoral campaign and the Jewish community's reaction to it. We'll delve in a little bit on that. And then we're going to wonk out at the end for Elon and I talk a little bit about what is happening with the Gaza ceasefire, the efforts to try to take us beyond the first couple of steps of the 20-point plan. And Phylisa also was just in Israel and the West Bank with the J Street delegation. So I think we'll have some up-to-the-minute perspectives and updates to share. So that's our goal over the course of the coming 45 minutes or so. And I'll just reiterate Elon's ask that anybody who's with us hit that heart button, like what we're doing, and it helps us to get more people to watch, and we're really grateful for that. So, Elon, take it away. Tell me a little bit about you're a Virginia voter, right? You got to vote for Abby Spanberger. What does it mean?
Yeah, I'm a Virginia voter, and I also grew up in New Jersey. So every 4 years on the off year, like suddenly it's the center of the universe for what this very minor but very important election. So yeah, no, absolutely great night. I think the numbers, both from Spanberger and from Mikey Sherrill in New Jersey, way above what anybody predicted and expected. I was thinking they're going to win. Well, my hope was, if Sherrill wins by 5 to 10 and maybe Spanberger wins somewhere like around 7 to 10 and both of them to end up in the mid double digits. It's great. And I think a signal, a year in, and this is also true of the Mamdani race, which we'll talk more. The one common theme amongst all of these races is affordability, the economy. This was the reason Donald Trump won a year ago. He hasn't really done anything to fix that. He's been off doing all these other things, focus on, sending ICE agents through American cities and, shutting down the government, doging. And, I think especially in Northern Virginia,
yeah,
I live in a community with a lot of people who are government officials. These are people who, despite the public reputation and the beating that they take, work really hard hours and could be making a lot more money if they're doing something else. And now they have this whole new uncertainty they're dealing with, which is just really terrible. And I think all of it was reflected in the voting.
And, one of the things I think everybody's debating who's in the Washington political world and involved in politics around the country is, what does last night's election results tell us about Democratic strategy, about messaging, about messengers, about tactics? What can we learn from a set of very disparate off-year elections? We not only had Virginia and New Jersey statewide elections, we had local races, things that were like, state legislative seats in Georgia. We had Supreme Court seats in Pennsylvania. And of course, the big ballot proposition out in California. There were little races also all over the country. And in every single race, the Democrats did better than expected and certainly outperformed 2024. So, there's a great debate going on within the Democratic Party about what is the right way forward. And we need a single message and we need a single messenger. You came up with a great phrase this morning as we were talking this through. What do you think we need?
Yeah. Basically, the phrase we're talking about was a mom burger would probably be the way to put it, which is you need both Mamdani and you need Spanberger and everybody in between, all the different things. And what Mamdani brought to his race was incredible understanding of communications, understanding the technology of and political technology and digital organizing of the 2020s, connecting with his community in that way, and really understanding that the new mediums and getting the base mobilized. With Spamberger, I think it was a more traditional race, just somebody who really fit her community well, has an incredible bio and background and set of achievements as a 15-year CIA analyst and official. And so you're going to need the person I turn to is Barack Obama. I mean, this is what he did in 2008, right?
He was the original Momburger. Is that what you?
Yes, he was the original Moundberger, and that he both excited the base and excited all these young people and got them all to come in because of the way he communicated, and he understood digital organizing 1.0. I'd argue that, which is what we were looking at then. So he had all of that, and he still had a message that was comforting and appealing and worked bipartisanship. All kinds of people. You know, he won Indiana, if you remember, right? I mean, and it was that he also was facing, like we are right now, a national mood that was very bad, which really helps the party out of power. And so you put those things together, that's what you're going to need, the kind of person you need to build a coalition in 28, at least as I see it. But the other thing I'll just say, Jeremy, you were talking about different local races. You know, as a Virginian, the Virginia House of Delegates went from 51-49 to 64-36. That's crazy. 13 seats flipping. That's a big deal. And you don't do that unless you win all over Virginia, not just in the very blue Northern Virginia suburbs where I live, but also parts of the South and Southwest. And again, you're going to need different kinds of candidates for that, different kinds of messages, wrappings, but all of it, I think, still wrapped in basic affordability, economic issues where the country is right now.
Right. And I, will definitely be writing more about this, and I'm, trying to formulate the best way to put it. But I think as we head into 2026, that those of us who want to ensure that we win the House and have a shot at taking back the Senate, I think that we want to not be obsessed with the idea that we need one message and one tactic and one strategy. And I've been calling it everything, everywhere, all at once. That we need to be able to speak to people where they're at, meet the realities of each local situation. What works in New York City is not necessarily going to work in Iowa. And what works in Iowa is not necessarily going to work in Seattle or Portland. And we need to allow the Democratic Party to be a big enough tent that it can accommodate the Abby Spambergers and the Mikey Sherrills on the one hand, and the folks who are going to run great statewide races in places like Iowa, and also at the same time have the energy and the excitement that are generated by a Zohran Mamdani, this sense that we're upending the established order, that we're not going to be a tired old party of, folks 20 years older than me, which is really getting up there at this point. We are not going to be that party, that we're going to have energy, that we're going to relate to people, that we're listening to folks and hearing the anger and hearing the frustration, and let that play out in the way it plays out locally, and not demand that we have one set of litmus tests across the board. So I just want to say welcome again to everybody. We're here on Word on the Street Live. It is Elon Goldenberg and Jeremy Benamy coming to you as we do 4 p.m. Eastern every week. You can find our recordings of these gatherings on our Substack Word on the Street homepage, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all sorts of other platforms. We're joined today, and I want to invite into the conversation, because we are discussing New York in some depth, and we want to really dig in to the way that the Israel issue played out, the way that the Jewish politics played out in New York City with the election of Zohran Mamdani last night in New York City. So I want to invite into the conversation Phylisa Wisdom, who is the executive director of New York Jewish Agenda. Hey, Phylisa, it's good to see you. Phylisa has really worked her entire career in a whole range of issues, from education, public health, advancing social justice in New York, committed to the core values of the Jewish community of Tikkun Olam, social justice, and you're building New York Jewish Agenda into a great partner for J Street. We're in the Progressive Israel Network together, and we share so much together. And we'll talk a little bit about a trip you just took with us. But tell the audience who may not know the New York Jewish Agenda, tell them a little bit about the organization and what you guys do.
Awesome. And thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here. NIJA, as you said at the top of the call, is really, in some ways, a sister organization to J Street, a member of the Progressive Israel Network. But our mission is that we advocate, organize, and convene liberal Jewish New Yorkers to impact policy, politics, and communal discourse. So those three areas of impact: policy means, legislation at City Hall and also in Albany. Politics is what we've all just come out of and what is sort of the continuing cycle, and communal
Did
discourse.
something just happen?
The politics part has taken a center stage in recent weeks for sure, as well as communal discourse, sort of how we as a Jewish community talk amongst ourselves and make our voices heard on our priorities. And there's, of course, lots of overlap. And as we've just seen, and we'll get into a little bit more, some areas of disagreement within our community.
Well, tell us a little bit. I mean, you've been on the ground, for this entire campaign for the last year, and NIJA, of course, being filled with a bunch of politically connected and thoughtful and liberal Jewish New Yorkers. You've been right in the center of this race. Tell us a little bit about the dynamics that developed and some of the changes that may have happened over the course of the race with the way the community was relating to Mamdani and relating to each other. But take us inside the New York bubble and give the rest of the country a little sense of what was going on.
Sure. So, I mean, Assemblymember Mamdani, now Mayor-elect Mamdani, was sort of a newish assembly member when he announced his candidacy for mayor, alongside many other candidates who were both known to voters and less known to voters. So, for example, one of our co-founders, Brad Lander, was a candidate at the time as well, and the city council speaker, Adrian Adams, among many others. Andrew Cuomo was our governor, so he is someone who's really known to New York voters. His father was our governor. It's a dynasty that longtime New Yorkers are very familiar with. And it was really interesting we're a 501c3, it's important to say. So our role here was not to endorse, really, as I said in our mission, it's, politics, policy, and communal discourse. So we were never going to have a horse in the race necessarily, but we're watching with interest as then Assemblymember Mamdani was sort of ascendant, and we were obviously still reeling from the October 7th response here in our city and state, as well as the ensuing war that, as I'm sure is true across the country, animated political discourse in a really significant way. We knew it would play a big role in the mayoral race. I don't think any of us understood the extent to which it would once Zohran Mamdani won the primary. That became very clear, and once it looked like he could. And so really from late June when that happened to now, issues of anti-Semitism, Israel, Palestine have really been in the news almost daily. There are many, many other things that other people who are not Jewish are paying attention to, and we're paying attention to at this race. But it was interesting the extent to which non-Jewish New Yorkers were thinking about our communal issues and talking about them and weighing in on them and looking to see what candidates had to say about them. So I think many of us are feeling a range of things about the outcome, but certainly something that I think is unifying is a bit battered and bruised from kind of being this political football, being so under a microscope. Our rabbis have been in the news. Our rabbis have been disagreeing with each other publicly. That if you are synagogue affiliated,
That's shocking. Rabbis disagreeing with each other? Never in history of the Jewish people have rabbis disagreed with each other.
I think also never in history has the joke been truer that like a Jew on a desert island would need two synagogues, one to attend and one to hate. That has felt like a really present kind of reality for us.
So
So go ahead.
I'm kind of curious, Phylisa, to get into this. Look, with Mamdani, I think a lot of the initial reaction, we at J Street, we actually had some shows which we did with New York voters after the primary. And me personally, I'll just tell you a little bit about how I was seeing it back then, and I'm interested in how we approached it a little bit at J Street, which was we didn't necessarily agree with him on policy in terms of his positions on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. obviously we continue to support, Israel as a Jewish, democratic, and secure state. We think that's still a possible option. We also were very opposed to just the mixing of criticism of Israel with automatic anti-Semitism. And at the same time, we wanted to be able to have our leaders at least engage with him and talk with him, because some of the things in the way he was saying them were not necessarily connecting with American Jews. Like some of the early reactions, for example, to the globalize the Intifada stuff. I think I didn't like the way exactly he was talking about it. Again, he's a mayor of New York, so I'm not sure he necessarily needs to have very strong opinions on all these issues, or that needs to be the reason for the race. But we tried at least to connect and see if he would listen and engage. And I'm sure you all did the same at New York Agenda, Jewish Agenda. So I'm kind of interested, how did it evolve over time? How did his thinking evolve, or the way he spoke about these issues evolve over time? Do you think he was listening?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think an important one for Jewish New Yorkers to be thinking about, because he is the mayor-elect, and it has been a major topic of conversation. I think that there are a few things. One is that he is someone with deeply held and very informed views on this region and on this conflict. So while he may not hold the same lane as the majority of Jewish voters, and our lane at New York Jewish Agenda is similar to J Street, I would say probably identical. Um, it's not that he's someone who needs new information necessarily. Like he has really developed this as part of his politic. It's an early animating issue for him. What did happen, though, is that he understood the way that it feels and the way that it shows up for Jewish New Yorkers and Israeli New Yorkers, and sought out, as far as I could see, I was in some of these and I heard about some of these conversations with Jewish leaders and Jewish communities, and listened and asked questions. And Globalize the Intifada is probably the most prominent example of this, the one that, like, no matter where you live on this call, you probably heard about this, that there was sort of an initial unwillingness to do the typical structure of condemnation. Like, I condemn, he didn't do that when he was first asked, and then went on to say that he doesn't use the phrase, which is true. There is no evidence that he has ever used that phrase on video or in text or anything like that, but said, I will continue to not use that phrase, and I would discourage its use, and has spoken somewhat movingly about conversations with rabbis in particular that he's had, and how he understands that when Jews hear that language, it means the proper noun of intifada. It means violence that happened in Israel with bus bombings and cafe bombings being in cities where Jews live, and in New York, where the largest Jewish city outside of Israel. Of course, that is something that people are fearful of. And I think you can see in his various answers in various places in different interviews, that he understands that and came to understand that. But I do think the point of, that you made, Elon, about he's the mayor-elect of New York. There's not an enormous foreign policy role to play, but there are things. There were members of the Jewish community who asked, for example, about the Israel parade. Would it still happen? Would the NYPD still go? Would the NYPD still go? What if they were visiting Israeli dignitaries? There's a whole other conversation about Benjamin Netanyahu, but in general, and I think he's been doing both, in public and in private, reassurance that yes, his politics mean that he will not be marching in the Israel parade. I will say, increasingly over the years, the Progressive Israel Network orgs are also not doing that.
Right, we're not even welcome, right? To
Yeah.
have a liberal Jewish point of view,
Yeah.
you're not welcome at the Salute to Israel parade, which is such a shame. I mean, I used to love doing
Yeah.
that as a kid.
It's a lost part of the conversation, actually, that in this Israel parade, like, there are communal dynamics too that mean the Israel parade is difficult for people who do support Israel and have a relationship with Israel. Not to mention our mayor-elect, who does not have those same commitments to Israel, who wouldn't want to march in it. So I think he's been having these conversations and talking openly about what he's learned from them. Some people are reassured by that, others are not. I think there's also another category of people who say, he says a lot publicly. I forgot the exact quote, but, like, if you agree with me on 10 out of 10 issues, you should see a psychiatrist or something. Like, he's not expecting voters to entirely agree, and I think he's aware that for Jewish voters, there is one or two really obvious areas of disagreement. And he was asking those voters to focus on the affordability agenda. And I think we will see, as more and more data comes out, that Jews across the political spectrum, observance spectrum, um, you know, they're worried about the affordability crisis in our city too. And so that did seemingly animate voters beyond their feelings about his Israel politics in some cases.
So I want to dive in a little bit into the sort of organized Jewish community, the established Jewish community, and its reaction to Mamdani. And it seems to me, from the J Street perspective, I think it's true from NIJA and our partner organizations, that our hope is to build bridges, right? Our hope is to find ways to engage with and find the avenues of potential cooperation with the people who we may disagree with around these issues. And there are really big fish to fry. Our democracy is at risk. Donald Trump is talking about sending troops into New York and defunding programs in New York. We've got a very serious challenge that those who don't feel comfortable with Globalize the Intifada and those that feel comfortable with it can find common ground in the need to protect our democracy, protect New York City, protect people's rights and freedoms across the board. So I think there's a part of the Jewish community that is anxious to extend a hand to see whether that hand is met, to find some ways to open up dialogue. But I have been really, really disappointed and shocked by the angle that established Jewish organizations have taken, which seems to me to be to pour fuel on the fire and to look to fear monger, fear incite, and I just happened, as 2 minutes before this, I saw a tweet on X, or whatever you call it these days, a post on X, from a rabbi out in the Hamptons who says, well, now that thousands of Jews are going to be fleeing New York City, we're going to be expanding our day school out here so you have a place of refuge. This is insane, right? I mean, I say this as somebody whose mother literally had to flee from her home because of the Nazis. And on my father's side, my grandparents literally had to flee their home because of pogroms in Russia, right? There are very recent incidents in history when you had actual danger incited by the leader of a country or a region. And it made sense for Jews to feel this way. But Mamdani is saying he wants to potentially reappoint the Jewish police commissioner. He's promising to ensure the safety of all New Yorkers. He's reaching out to the Jewish community. What is your perspective on the organized Jewish community and how it is handling this?
I think the first thing I'm thinking about is I had a Facebook memory pop up, recently, because we're in election season, of when, everyone, there were groups of people who said they would leave the country if Obama was elected. And I think this is just a thing that happens to some degree, that people threaten to leave if some election happens that doesn't go their way. I don't want to diminish that there are really real fear, like the fears that some of these are not good faith. This is not a good faith thing to say. In many cases, there are people who are afraid and are nervous and are watching to see what it looks like, and feel like for them, having the NYPD be involved in being the first stop for, hate crime prevention and work, that really matters to them. And so they are waiting to see. And I don't want to diminish that fear is real. I also think that is a threat that is really common. That threat happened when Bill de Blasio won. It was less specifically Jewish. But I think probably, that is not going to come to bear. I do think it's inflammatory and nerve-wracking that I think there's an element of this that's like, our orientation to this is that our safety does come from solidarity with our neighbors as well. And so us being the tip of the spear in any way is uneasy and makes me nervous that if he doesn't succeed, did Jews push him out, or any of those dynamics. So our role, I think, at NIJA and all of those in our lane, is to take the temperature down and
Right.
come from a place of like this is our city that we all love, and we may have voted for different candidates, but this is the mayor-elect who is, as you say, saying that he seeks to be the mayor for all of us, that he takes anti-Semitism seriously. There was a swastika drawn on a yeshiva today, and he immediately tweeted condemnation of it. He called it disgusting and said it has no room in our city. So that was sort of a day one test to some degree. He came right out and used language that was very strong. So I hope that those people don't leave. I think that's not good for our city. If we leave when we disagree with our mayor, I know it feels existential to some. Um, and there are statements that have come out of our community that I think are inflammatory and are not seeking to build bridges. And I'm not sure it's good for New York or the Jewish community to make an enemy of its incoming mayor on day one. We do have things in City Hall. I'm sure other cities have this, like Jewish Heritage Month celebration. There's right now a Jewish Advisory Council that our current mayor, Mayor Eric Adams, created. And I will just say, as a side note, Nija was publicly critical of that Jewish Advisory Council because it was 80% Orthodox men. And it was not clear, sort of, it looked like some of the priorities would not be liberal Jewish priorities, things like protecting yeshiva education, whether they taught secular education or not. Um, and where we know that, like in the synagogues we work most closely with, there are people standing up pro se legal clinics for migrants. There are people doing criminal justice reform work, pro democracy work, and those priorities didn't make it into that Jewish Advisory Council. So I hope that that Mayor-elect Mamdani is thinking about who will sit in that kind of council. It should absolutely have space for some of the more legacy mainstream institutions, and it probably will be a broader tent that include those like us and even those to our left. And I hope that these people who are feeling afraid can sort of see that that what comes to pass is that the full diversity of the Jewish community is respected and listened to, and that will include some Jews we don't agree with inside of our own community. But that should be reassuring, I hope.
Yeah, and I'll just echo a couple of thoughts and points on this. One is, Phylisa, totally agreeing with you. You know, when I worked for Kamala Harris on the campaign last year, we get 70% of the Jewish vote. It wasn't because of Israel issues. It was because the overwhelming majority of American Jews are liberal and they prioritize domestic policy issues. They also care about Israel, but they align with the Democratic Party on all of these other things. And that's where the votes come from, and that's where you're going to have even a lot of Jewish support for Mamdani. I also want to go back. One other thing I was thinking as we're having this conversation about unhelpful sort of Jewish community organizations. Personally, I've just been very disappointed with the ADL this week. This is an organization that now has a Mamdani tracker going for all of his appointees and actions. After a year in which there has been no Trump tracker, where's the Trump tracker? Trump has had all these anti-Semitic officials who've had this record of saying anti-Semitic things. He's got Kash Patel threatening the ADL, which says nothing. You have Elon Musk doing Nazi salutes at the inauguration, and the ADL basically making excuses for it. You have to actually, if you're going to purport to represent Jewish safety, do that. And meanwhile, the ADL, at the same time that it's taking all the language on its website about defending civil rights and equality for all off the website, is creating a tracker for the first Muslim mayor of New York City. None of that seems very comforting at all, and is likely to spur more anti-Semitism, not less.
And by the way, it's not in keeping with its legacy. The thing about the ADL is that civil rights prong of the work is one of the most glorious parts of its legacy. That the ADL was so front and center there in the 60s as the civil rights movement was really coming to its peak and achieving the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. And the ADL was right in the thick of all of that. And so it's going against its legacy, and it's going against the core pillar of the fight against anti-Semitism, which is that the fight against anti-Semitism is a fight against hate and bigotry across the board. Anti-Semitism is the oldest hatred in the world, but every other hatred springs from the same root, this inability to see yourselves in the shoe of the other. And I'm afraid that by becoming a very parochial, Jewish-only organization, that ADL is losing the thread on what it is that ultimately keeps our community safe. I don't know what your perspective on the New York situation is, Phylisa?
I totally agree with what you both just said, and I mean, again, it's a sort of philosophical difference that seems to be emerging and kind of sharpening, that we see our safety as inextricably linked with the safety of our neighbors, and especially our minority neighbors. When Islamophobia is on the rise, so is anti-Semitism, and vice versa. And I feel very nervous about something that singles us out so uniquely and specifically and explicitly, from our neighbors, who, again, most of whom understand that there's an affordability crisis, that universal childcare is long overdue, that free or cheaper public transit will keep our neighbors safe too. That safety is something we should think really expansively about. And I think the tracker is inflammatory, and I'm not sure it helps at all toward what we're trying to do, which is take the temperature down and have our city be successful. Um, and to your point, Elon, like, yeah, there is a lot to track about the anti-Semitism that is platformed in the Trump administration, and that we have not seen that at all. So I find that disappointing, and I think we're just going to keep our heads down and keep doing our work locally, which is not that. We will call out anti-Semitism wherever we see it in our city, whether it comes from the left, from the right, from the mayor, from the governor, from city council members, from anyone. But going in on day one with this sort of orientation that he's going to fail and that he is an anti-Semite and that he's inflaming anti-Semitism is just not our orientation. Our orientation is, let's make sure that the people who work in City Hall, the mayor and everyone else, really has a robust and thoughtful and nuanced understanding of anti-Semitism, and be in communication and build a trusting relationship so that we can talk to each other about how we ensure, as he has said many times, he's committed to combating anti-Semitism and all forms of hate, that we can ensure that they have the tools and resources and relationships to do that. And we think that's the way to keep Jews safe in New York City.
Boy, do I wish that you were in charge of the Jewish community in New York City instead of the people who are writing the awful letters that are circulating, because you're setting exactly the right tone. I mean, if you really want to lead in a moment of division and in a moment when tensions are high, leadership really looks like working to find common ground and turning down the volume and turning down the temperature. And there's just way too much of our communal leadership that seems intent on turning the dial up and turning the flames up. And I'm very concerned about that. I hope that we can turn over a new leaf, and I hope you'll be in the forefront of that in New York. Very excited about that.
Thank you.
So, Elon, should we turn a little bit over to what's going on in the other part of the world? Or any further New York comments?
Yeah.
And I don't mean California, by the way, when I say the other part of the world. We didn't discuss Prop 50 over there in California, which was also a very exciting victory.
No, but yeah. No, Phylisa, don't go yet. I think we wanted to, if you're still there, we wanted to turn to the other side of the world, being, Israel and Palestine.
Yeah,
and just start by asking you, you just went on a J Street trip. You were there. I was jealous. I wish I had done things differently so I could have joined you all, because you were there. I think it was the week after the deal to end the war, when all the living hostages came home. How was that?
I am so grateful. I will say publicly thank you to Jeremy, as I have said privately, for including and inviting me on this delegation. It was truly an honor, and it was like, it sounds hyperbolic, but truly a life-changing experience. Like, I had been to Israel, I had not been to the West Bank before, so I saw things that I have read about and understood to be true, and seeing them in person and experiencing what it feels like on the ground is just profoundly different. And Elon, as you said, we arrived, I think it was 5 days after all the living hostages came back. So we knew that we were going to be going to Hostage Square, and we knew we'd be meeting with hostage family members. The tone of that was more similar, actually, than I thought it would be, but certainly different. And having watched Hostage Square for the past 2 years, just being there in person, and it was really unlike anything else. And having the ability to go to Kfar Aza and the Nova exhibition, the Breaking the Silence tour of the West Bank, specifically Hebron, was unbelievable. I mean, just like being in the streets and seeing how the soldiers and the police operate and seeing the different places that different people walk. I wish I kept we kept saying to each other, like, this is just something 95% of Israelis and New York Jews just will not get to experience. All of this put together, it was really something. And the timing, I think the timing also meant I got to see Israelis exhale a little bit. Like, I didn't get to see what it looked like the week before, but even just staying after with my friend's family in Tel Aviv, they were talking about how they can actually sort of really start to grieve and think about. I think there's a lot of critique over in the United States of Israeli society's lack of understanding and thinking about what was happening in Gaza. And I heard people say, and many will have a critique of this, that they feel like they can now. They can really assess kind of what's happening outside of the immediate, like, make sure your family is okay feeling that was really pervasive around Israeli society.
Yeah, we had a webinar with a number of Israelis, both hostage families and uh, journalists. Supposed to be a commemoration of October 7th. It was the day after, and it became the day of the deal. And one of them said, or it was 2 days after the deal, one of them said, and it's really stuck with me since, they've said, every day since October 7th, 2023 has been October 7th, 2023, but today is October 9th, 2025. And now I think there's a lot of reckoning to do. I think there is a lot to actually consider with what comes next. And I think Israeli society is only now going to have to start reckoning, including with what it did in Gaza and what this government perpetrated in Gaza.
Yeah. I think also what was interesting too is, while I was there, a lot of things happened in New York. There was a sermon from Rabbi Cosgrove. There was a subsequent letter signed by 1,000 rabbis. Like, there was sort of a lot moving here, and being able to put those two things together and hold those thoughts. I really felt how intertwined they all are. So, like, one example of that is that we had at NIJA, at the time, off the record briefing with hostage family members who were from Kulanu Hatufim. So they were the hostage family members who were calling for a deal, I think earliest on before it became sort of a more mainstream thing to do. And we had elected officials from city council, from the state legislature, including then Assemblymember Mamdani, come and listen to these family members and hear that almost every elected official on that call was calling for a ceasefire, and had been since really the top of the war. But to hear that the call for a ceasefire and the call for the return of the hostages are the same and should be treated as the same, and that you can elevate and should elevate the plight of the hostages as well. And he now, when he references what he has heard from hostage families, it's from that meeting. And so that also just, I felt proud of that, and happy that we were able to give that perspective to elected officials back in New York, whose job in local and state politics is not to understand deeply foreign policy, but they have to comment on it sort of all the time. And so as I was there, kind of thinking through too, what are some of the lessons, for example, from Standing Together, about Muslim, Jewish, or Arab Israeli, Palestinian Israeli co-resistance, and how can we think about that here with Jewish Muslim co-resistance in a more kind of domestic way, that folks are so sophisticated at over there. And we got to meet with a lot of these civil society leaders on this extremely well organized trip. So I came back with sort of lots of ideas about how we can take some of those lessons, and including just the way that we know Israelis, like, every single week in the street in the thousands, is inconceivable to Americans. Like, we do a good job with No Kings and some of these other things. We've had some big days like that, but we do not do what they do there. And um, how do we bring some of that here too, locally and nationally, was something swirling around in my mind that we can learn from Israelis.
And you went on to the West Bank, and you did get, as you said, with Breaking the Silence and with other groups, a chance to see what occupation looks like firsthand. And you said something about 95% of Israelis and New York Jews don't have any idea what is actually going on. That might be, an underestimate of the percentage that doesn't know what's going on. And did you happen to go to al-Khair? Was that one of the towns that you went to?
Yeah.
Because, they just had a demolition order issued against al-Khair. And al-Khair is a Bedouin village in the South Hebron Hills. It probably has, a couple hundred residents and loose agglomeration of structures. It's hard to, call it really a village even. It's a camp of 200 people, one that I've been to numerous times. It's right on the edge. It's being encroached upon by a settlement called Carmel. And this week, a new set of demolition orders was issued against it. And Jamie Raskin, who is one of our heroes at J Street, I'm sure for Nija as well, is leading a letter now in the House of Representatives to urge Israel to back off of this concept of demolishing the village you were just in. And the response from traditional Israeli advocacy organizations in D.C. is, oh, come on, these folks have known about this for a long time. They have their rights. They can go to Supreme Court. I mean, it's such a disjuncture. The reality when you go there and you see it versus what the arguments are here in the United States. Try to paint a picture for people of al-Khair and what it is facing, the pressure that it's facing.
So I was so glad that we were going there. I had heard about al-Khair for a while, and also just a couple weeks prior, it was in the news for those of us who follow this kind of news, because devastatingly, an activist there was murdered by a settler who had Yinon Levy, out of Hathaline is who was murdered, sadly, who is known to some people that I know in New York. And Yinon Levy, who's the settler that was, I believe, caught on camera murdering him,
Yep.
had
By
previously,
Auda's camera. That's the most astounding thing. It was Auda's own camera caught it.
wow. And he had been sanctioned under the Biden administration sanctions, and then those had since been lifted. So that was like there, getting there and seeing there was some sort of remembering Auda on the wall. And I think that this trip was a mix of different kinds of professionals, I should say too. Like there were a handful of us, a small group of us who were Jewish professionals. There were some who were Jewish, but not in a Jewish professional role. And there were several who were not Jewish, who do things like work for members of Congress or do political fundraising. Some had been on an unpacked delegation, some had never been to the land. So there was like a real mix. But I went there knowing this place and having read about this place and having read about this person. So it was really moving to just drive up and see, the signs in his memory. It's also just, again, like when you drive up, there is this village and it's like really small. I mean, really small and somewhat, makeshift. There's like kids running around barefoot. You can tell it's definitely the kind of place where like everyone's looking after each other's kids and people kind of know each other. And they brought out tea for us, and there was a kid kind of hanging around who helped hand out the tea. And really, like, just beyond, there's a community center that's built, and so that's where we were all sitting. And I think there are some services that are done out of there. I'm not exactly sure what they are, but there seemed to be like communal leadership that kind of hosts people there. Right beyond, there's like a big Israeli flag and an outpost, and then that's like on one side of the village, and then just on the other side of the village, there's another. That one I think is a more formally, like already official settlement, as opposed to the outposts, which are not official and not legal. And you could just feel like it was claustrophobic to be in al-Khair surrounded by these other folks. We didn't see any of those settlers actually drive through or anything, but I could just feel like how tense that would be. The way that the kids are running around and like the community is just sort of out, that like someone who's encroaching on your land and community and doesn't want you to be there is just driving through your village. So that was really like profound. And also just how easy, when you hear about demolition orders, like I didn't know what to picture is being demolished exactly. It's an easy place to demolish. Like it's not it, the walls like we're used to, or roofs like we're used to necessarily. There are those, but it just feels so vulnerable. And I think we all left with a sense of like, protect this place at all costs, and not only protect it from demolition, but like these people get to have other services that we think of as necessary to live and have a thriving community that they just don't have.
Water.
So,
Have a water, electricity.
electricity. Yeah. Like, I mean, beyond like not demolishing as the absolute floor. Like we should think of the ceiling as how do we actually have these communities be places where people can live and thrive and work. And a lot of their income, we learned, any at all, is like selling livestock, which we know settlers in other villages, I'm not sure if this has happened in al-Khair, it probably has, are stealing or killing livestock, which is like the main way that people can do any kind of trade. So yeah, I was shocked, not shocked. I was very saddened to hear that there was a demolition order. And I know there's like a GoFundMe going around, which I'm sure we should all be donating to, but the solution needs to be much bigger than that, and really protecting these communities.
Elon?
Yeah. Oh, all right. Sure. So, Jeremy, I wonder if we want to pivot off of this a little bit and talk for a few minutes just about where we are now in terms of Gaza. Maybe I'll start and respond and tell me what you think. But I'm looking at the situation right now, and now we're about 3 or 4 weeks in. I'll start with my biggest concern, and then maybe some hope. My biggest concern is that it definitely feels like there's a desire from Netanyahu and many on the Israeli right to turn this temporary first phase of the deal into the permanent new reality, which is what's happened with every single other. I said this before, I think, I don't know if on this show or not. Every single other previous Gaza deal has turned into essentially, we get the deal, we agree on all kinds of other things that are going to happen, and those other things never happen. And you end up with a Gaza that's divided. You have Israel owning half of Gaza, Hamas on the other half of Gaza, enough humanitarian aid for the situation to subsist. Every once in a while, you have clashes like the ones we've had where you have an Israeli soldier killed or 100 Palestinians killed, and things just stay as they are. I think that's what Netanyahu would probably be perfectly happy with, and also what Hamas would be perfectly happy with, right? And the alternative to that is to start pushing through on this 20-point plan.
Right. And that leads to the question of, well, who's not happy with that, right? If Hamas and Netanyahu are happy, who are the counter pressures on that?
Yeah, which I think, weird to say, but Donald Trump, for one, potentially, despite all the frustration with him and all the other things, seems to be increasingly invested in this process. And, you and I talked about when we saw Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff on 60 Minutes, very reasonable. Or even the reporting I've seen in recent days on how they're thinking about this international transition force, which is the next piece of this. The U.S. is pushing hard on that. It's actually, the descriptions I've heard, at least I've read in the press, have been quite sound, thoughtful. A draft Security Council resolution, if folks saw, recently put out just a few days ago by Barak Ravid. I think it's a first draft. I think there'll be a lot of negotiating on it. But these are serious steps. The fact that there even is a Security Council resolution. So you have the U.S. on the one hand, then you have the Arab states on the other, who I think are feeling like before October 7th, we're ready to just kind of dismiss this issue. We don't need the Palestinians. This is just a headache. This is hopeless. If we can get some kind of deal with Israel, we can work with the Americans. That's probably fine. We can have something symbolic for the Palestinians, and that's it. I kind of think that's where the Gulf states were before October 7th. That's not where they are now, after the last 2 years. And it's not just the horrible things that have happened there in Gaza, although that's been horrible. And it's not just the fact that their populations have been very mobilized by this. If you think young people in the United States have been horrified by what they've seen on social media, it's much more extreme in the Arab world. I think it's also a realization that you just can't contain this thing if you don't take care of it. And you're going to end up with, as a result of this conflict between Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza, you ended up with a war in Lebanon, challenges on the Red Sea, a war between Israel and Iran, missiles being launched at Qatar, all these different pieces.
Tensions in Syria.
Yeah, incredibly destabilizing. And so if the Arab states are willing to keep pushing and pressure Hamas, and the U.S. is willing to keep pushing and pressure Israel, make some progress. I still think you're going to need elections next year and a new Israeli government.
Right. And that's, about maybe 11 months at the outside now till there's elections.
Yeah.
What are the things that have to happen? What are the next steps that would get us through these 11 months? Well, I think, number one is to get some form of international force in to Gaza, to get it rallied, to get a Palestinian force that it is backing up trained and getting that inserted. Just those two steps are going to take months at this point. And so the standing up of a security force and the beginnings of the establishment of a transitional authority that is going to govern Gaza, that is Palestinian, but doesn't have any Hamas, and at the outset is not a PA organ, but is PA blessed. If those two things can happen, and it is possible for those two things to keep moving, even with a Netanyahu government in place, and somehow getting through these next 11 months, or maybe it's less if the elections end up being earlier, but getting a little bit more stability, getting a little bit more aid, getting a little bit more governance structure, all of it underneath a UN resolution. It seems to me like that's what the next months are going to look like.
Yeah, and there are talks going on in Egypt amongst the different Palestinian factions to try to arrange something, because people need to understand this transitional government is going to need to be a government. Hamas can't be part of it, but it can't be fighting it. And similarly, on the transitional force, Hamas is not going to be, I guess, obviously not part of the transitional force. The purpose of the transitional force is going to be to ultimately replace Hamas. But the key here is and to help build a Palestinian entity that can replace Hamas. That's really the key to all this, replacing Hamas, and then you can disarm it. That's going to take a lot of time, and Hamas in a position of weakness, thinking it can kind of ride this out. But I think we also just need to remember the play of the Israeli right wing here, which is right now the idea they're pushing is we're going to take the half of Gaza that's owned by Israel, and we're going to just invest in that. We're going to let the other half be a wasteland. We're going to invest in this. We're going to get Palestinians, magical Palestinians who want to live under Israeli rule, to come over to this half, and they will thrive and they will moderate under Israeli rule. And then, eventually that will spread to all of Gaza. That's the Israeli hard right approach. And the problem with it is it's very obvious. It's going to fail because Palestinians will forced to choose between Hamas, who many of them are really fed up with and don't want to live with, and Israel will choose Hamas, which is not great, but that's the reality. They're not going to flow over to the country, the military that just, killed a lot of civilians in Gaza. And then the Israeli right wing's response is going to be, see, we have no partner. People won't come over and do this. So we have no partner. So there's nothing we can do. So we're just going to keep doing what we're doing now. Right. And that's the play. That's what people need to understand. And the alternative play is to actually keep pushing on this.
And you've got a great Substack. It's either out or you're drafting it. I know I've read it. Is it out yet?
Coming out tomorrow morning.
Excellent. So you have a great Substack. Everybody should look for it, which is going to be laying out all of this related to Gaza, and it's really thoughtful. And then Friday, J Street's going to have a webinar, which is going to talk a little bit about Syria, because the president of Syria is making the first ever post-World War II visit to the White House for a president of Syria. And so we want to set that up with a public webinar to help people understand what's going on in Syria, a little bit of Lebanon as well, and set up the visit on Monday. And there is just so much, we're going to be following as well, Phylisa, in New York. We say thank you to you for joining us, Phylisa Wisdom from New York Jewish Agenda. And if you guys don't know about it, or if you're in New York, check out nija.org. And we are so proud of our partnership with you, and it's so great to be with you on this program. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Word on the Street Live, 4 p.m. Eastern, here on Substack. Elon, any final words on any of these topics?
Just maybe hit the like button and the heart button on those. I'm going to make that naked plug again. It helps actually, because it gets more people to then read, and it pushes us up the algorithm. And gets J Street's message out further.
I'm going to press it. What happens when I press it?
I just did it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, look, it works.
We're all doing it.
This is fun. All right.
Join
Excellent. All right. Phylisa, any final words?
No, I'm so grateful to you. I'm so grateful to J Street for the role you're playing and the seat you're occupying, and really, really grateful for our partnership too, and to keep talking about what's happening in New York.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Phylisa, Elon. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Phil, for pressing the like button. We really appreciate that. All right. Take care, everybody. See you next week.